This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.
Hello everyone out there in Bourbon Real Talk land, Randy Sullivan. Gonna do an episode today that's a little bit different than our normal format. We're not gonna have a show guest on today. I have been doing a whole lot of tastings with people, and I have seen a few instances where there might be some confusion out there for those of you who are newer to the whiskey world about how to actually do a whiskey tasting, how to break it down, what the etiquette is, what the process is, all of that stuff. And so I thought that I would take this opportunity to do a piece, because we have had a ton of new subscribers join the Bourbon Real Talk Facebook page and also YouTube. And I can't quite see the people who subscribe on the podcast players, but I can see our numbers going up. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to subscribe. And with all of those new people, I assume that there's going to be some people that are whiskey curious, but they're, not exactly sure how to do a whiskey tasting. So we're just going to knock that out. So first off, I'll tell you a couple of stories that I had. I have people over to my house every week to pick things up, drop things off. I'm carrying something somewhere for someone else. And whenever you come over, I always offer to do a tasting for you. So anything that I have open, typically we're gonna try it if you wanna try it. And I poured somebody a little bit of whiskey, and we sat down and they had 3 glasses sitting in front of them like this. And I poured the first glass, and when I went to go get the second bottle to pour the second glass, the person grabbed the glass and went and slammed it back like it was a shot. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, I'll get you some more in that glass, but that's kind of not what we do here. Let me, kind of educate you a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. You come into every experience with the sum total of all your past experiences, and that kind of informs you on what you need to be doing. But, I thought this would be a good opportunity to educate. So let's talk about the equipment that we use whenever we are doing a tasting. So first off, you're going to have some glasses, and almost all serious whiskey drinkers, when they taste their whiskey, to break it down and to really pay attention. I'm not talking about just getting a drink to relax after dinner or whatever. I'm talking about, you're really paying attention. Most of them use some form of a Glen carrying glass, right? So this is what they call a wee Glen. So you can see that it's roughly half the size of a full-size Glen. So a full-size Glen is going to be 6 ounces and 1/8 to 7/8, so somewhere between 6 and 7 ounces. The wee Glens are roughly half that, about 3 1/4 ounces. And the reason why I use these guys, and I do take them with me everywhere that I go for tastings, is because it actually helps you to pour a smaller amount into the glass. And that way you feel like you have a substantial enough pour. You're not just looking into the bottom of this basin and it looks like there's nothing in there. So you get enough that you can taste the spirit, but not so much that you're drinking really more than you need to. And often when you're doing one of these whiskey tastings, the host has brought out their premium bottles, and you don't want to be known as the person that's, taking really deep pours. So the other thing, not to, make it too ridiculous, but you do need some comfortable seating. So I'm sitting at my pool table when I do tastings. I can fit up to 10 people in here. I have enough equipment that I could have 10 people and everybody have everything that they need and have their own space. But I found that I used to have bar chairs up here that were backless, and a lot of people were getting uncomfortable. So you want to have a chair that's comfortable, depending on how long you're going to be tasting, an appropriate amount of space on a table. You also need to have these guys. So this is just a lint-free rag. And you can buy these on Amazon Prime by the dozen. They're relatively inexpensive. But one of the issues that you have when you're doing a whiskey tasting is you put so little of the spirit in your glass that if there's any remnant left over from the previous pour, or even if it's just a few drops of water, on a percentage basis, since you're putting so little in the glass, that's going to be enough to change the flavor of that spirit. And so you want to avoid that, but if you use paper towels and then you hold the glass up to light and you look, you're going to see that there's lint and things that are stuck on the inside of the glass. And that can, kind of be a turnoff. Plus, you don't want that stuff in your whiskey. It could affect its flavor. And so most people have some form of a lint-free rag that they take with them so that they can clean that glass out between flights and make sure that there's nothing that's going to affect the flavor of the next whiskey that you're pouring. Also, bottled water, right? Because you're going to be drinking. If you go to a whiskey tasting event and there's like a bottle share and there's a lot of bottles that are out on the table, you want to make sure that you're hydrating. But that water is also going to come in handy because you're going to rinse in between your flights to make sure that your glass is clean. And then I like to have a bourbon aroma wheel somewhere on the table to help people out. You can just search bourbon flavor wheel or bourbon aroma wheel, and you will find lots of these guys. I like this one from Modern Thirst. I have a handful of these that are laminated at my house. And sometimes people just need that mental cue of seeing a word, and then it'll trigger in their mind like, oh yes, that's what I was tasting. Another alternative would be a aroma kit. So I've shown this to you guys before, but I curated this box, the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. And inside of it, it's got what is kind of like an aroma wheel. It's not shaped like a wheel, but it's got the key for all of the different scents that are in there. And then you can see all of the vials are numbered. And then you can kind of sit down with this and break down the whiskey. And we're going to do that some towards the end. And so that's all the equipment that I like people to have. Process-wise, one of the things that people are confused about is how much do you pour? And so what I like to do is somewhere around a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an ounce, which is really a small amount. But that's all you really need. So I'll show you with this whiskey. This is the Remus Repeal Reserve. This is the second release. I have the third release here, and I've got the Volstead Act, which is a one-time release, and we'll talk about those in a minute when we get to the review process. But when you're pouring whiskey and you're only trying to do a very small amount, if you go too slow, the whiskey will actually run down the side of the bottle and not make it into the glass. So you kind of got to develop your technique and learn to splash a little bit, if you will. But I like to get it right up to the edge and then give it a little splasharoo. And that is about it. And I'll hold that up so that you can see it. It's not very much, right? And then these wee Glens, and that's actually a little more than I would normally pour. That's getting closer to probably 1/4 of an ounce. But you don't need very much of the spirit in the glass for you to get a sense of it. And again, you don't want to take a whole ton of somebody's premium spirit and kind of, make them be worried about you showing up the next time they're doing a bottle share. Now, once the spirit is in the glass, let's talk about how you nose. So there's a lot of tutorials out there, and I'm going to tell you right now that I am not a professional taster. I have a lot of experience tasting spirits. I started trying to develop my palate in the wine world, and there are some techniques that I use that are frowned upon by the actual professional tasters. So you do it the way that you want. You can go on YouTube and search for how to taste whiskey. But the way that I do it is I like to smell left to right, right to left, and then taste left to right, right to left. And the reason why I do that is if you are just drinking one spirit, it doesn't matter. Smell, smell, smell until you feel like you've gotten a sense for the spirit. And then you can taste until you feel like you've gotten the palate of that particular whiskey. But when you are lining things up to identify the differences in, say, like a series, like these are the special releases from the new Remus line from MGPI, it might be wise for you to switch up the order that you are tasting and smelling the spirits, because the smell of glass 1 will affect the way you perceive the smell of glass 2. And so that's why I'll go from left to right, and then I'll give my senses a little bit of a time, take a couple of cleansing breaths, if you will, and then I'll go from right to left so that I'm not doing them in the same order each time. And I do the same thing with my tasting. Let's see. How to taste. That's where I get a little bit off. I like to put a small amount of the spirit in my mouth, and with a pour this large, that's enough for me to take probably 5 or 6 sips, which I know seems odd for people who are used to shooting whiskey, but this isn't, the type of whiskey that you shoot. So if you're trying to, concentrate and be thoughtful, this whiskey is, a annual release expression or a one-time release expression. So we don't want to just pound it down and disrespect it. We want to take the time. And so we put a small amount on our tongue, and I like to move it all around my mouth. I want it to coat my entire tongue. I want it underneath my tongue. I want it all around the roof of my mouth. I even want it on the outside on my gums if I can, because there's something to be said for mouthfeel too, and how does it feel in not just on your palate but in your mouth as a whole. And so I like to get it all around. Some people call it the Kentucky chew. It looks like you're chewing something, but you're actually not. So there's that. I did used to swish the whiskey to aerate it the way that you would wine, because I originally learned to taste alcoholic, beverages for detail in the wine world. And in wine, aerating the wine can open it up. But chemical reactions between whiskey, which is a much more stable solution than wine, are very slow. So aerating it probably doesn't do a whole lot. And there are some people that believe that, violently shaking a whiskey can actually, cause its flavor to be changed temporarily. And so yeah, now once it's on your palate and you get it coated, some people talk about when you're nosing the glass, keeping your mouth open, other things like that. You're just going to have to develop your own technique and see what feels best to you. But that's what I do. So something like this. And that's good whiskey. So once you are done tasting your whiskey, and we're going to save this because we're going to do a review of these whiskeys in a second. You're going to take your bottle of water, you're going to open it up, and you're going to put enough in there. And I like to fill it up past the fill line of wherever the spirit was to make sure that I'm getting all of the whiskey residue out of there. I'll give it a little bit of swirl. And this I shoot like it's a shot, right? And so the cool thing about that is that you're going to be hydrating while you're drinking. And I try to get the excess water out, and then I use my lint-free rag to push down into the glass, give it a twist, and then I'll typically smell the glass to make sure that there's no residue in there that I didn't get. And I know that I'm ready for the next round, and I'm not going to be negatively impacting that flavor experience. And that's it, right? So that's you're ready for the next round. You're ready to go. So let's talk about the process of tasting the whiskey. So I'm going to go ahead and pour these up. So we've got the Remus Repeal Reserve II. That's going to be in this glass. We don't need probably much more than that. This is the Remus Repeal Reserve III. And it will be in the second glass. Ooh, that's a deep pour. And then this is the Volstead Act, which is a one-time release. If you haven't had this yet, this topper's like a weapon. It's so freaking heavy. A lot of people drop it on accident because they do not expect it to be that heavy. Okay, so now we got our glasses poured up. Now, when I'm trying to communicate with somebody about what I'm tasting in whiskey, There's kind of two components. There's the nose of the whiskey, and then there's the palate, the way that it tastes itself. And so those two processes are broken down into three different segments, if you will. In the wine world, your first initial impression is referred to as the attack. I am not a super huge fan of that word because it just sounds pretentious and weird. And so I usually say on the front end, right? And then there's what they call the mid palate, right? And that's just what you're tasting in the middle of that process. There's no clear definition. It's not like the front end is for the first 2 seconds and the mid palate is for seconds 3 through 6 or whatever. It's just your personal experience. And then there's what they call the finish, right? And so when I'm nosing a whiskey, I can try to break down the nose into those three categories. Typically I don't. I just get tasting notes or nosing notes on the nose. I typically don't break it down on the front end, the mid, and the finish. But on the palate, you definitely do want to do that, right? And so, as I mentioned, I would smell these from left to right. And I'm trying to detect any differences. And there's a stark difference on this third one, which would make sense because these first two are from the same line. And theoretically, the producer probably wants that whiskey to stay as consistently as possible. On the palate, they are different, but on the nose, I'm not getting a huge difference. But on this one, I'm getting something very different on the nose. And so after going through that, I would reconfirm that to make sure that my smell of glass number 2 wasn't affecting my smell of glass number 3. So now I'm going to start with 3 and go back left. I'm still getting that distinct smell. This one's a lot of, well, we'll talk about the compounds later. Okay, so once I've smelled it up, now I'm going to taste them, left to right, right to left. Now, as you're starting to look for compound or flavors or aromas to pull out, you can kind of develop a base level of knowledge that's going to help you cheat, okay? And so first thing that I'd recommend that you do is take a look at the bottle and see what you're drinking, right? So on this particular bottle, it says that it is a straight bourbon whiskey. Straight, meaning unadulterated. And I do not see an age statement on here in particular. So if there's no age statement that says straight, it means that every whiskey that was put into this with this batch was at least 4 years old. And so younger whiskeys have different flavors than older whiskeys. And so that can you'll start to develop, okay, this is what I'm looking for now because I know that this isn't a really young whiskey. It's not a 2-3 year old. It's 4+ years old. And then if you look closer, they actually have the years of when the bourbons that went into this batch were made. And so all of these whiskeys are about 11 years old. And so that's actually getting up there, right? So we're going to have a lot of barrel influence. We're going to have a lot of flavors from the barrel. So flavors from the barrel are like caramelized wood sugar flavors. So you might get a honey flavor. You're going to get a caramel flavor. You're going to get a butterscotch. You're going to get a toffee. When they get up around 11, 12, 13, sometimes older, they start to lose some of those sweeter components and start to extract tannins and other things from the wood that are more bitter, right? So it may taste like leather or earthy or things like that. You can also check for a state of distillation. So it's distilled in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, okay? And so we know that this is an MGPI product because that's the only distillery in Lawrenceburg. If you see Tennessee and it's not Jack Daniel's and it's not, one of the other Tennessee distilleries, if it says on the back label especially that it came from Tennessee, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to taste Flintstone vitamins, right? Because it means that it's probably distillate from Dickel. And so over time, you'll develop like kind of those expectations to start looking for things. Rye whiskeys tend to taste like baking spices. So you're going to get nutmeg, clove, darker fruit would be like a fig or maybe a blueberry, definitely some cinnamon. So you look for those things. Kentucky bourbons are typically on the sweeter side, vanilla, caramel, those kinds of things. Texas whiskeys tend to be very sweet, but very, bold and spicy, even though they don't have a lot of rye in them. Most of them don't anyways. And I still get a lot of cinnamon on the Texas whiskeys. And then really old whiskeys and dusties, like bottles that are from, the 80s, 90s, 70s. Those bottles often start to develop an earthy, musty, leather, chemically kind of a flavor. And so knowing what you're drinking will help you to, think in that direction. Sometimes we're tasting things blind, single blind, where we know what the options are, and knowing those things will help you figure out which one is which. Sometimes we're tasting things double blind, and you just got to go off of your palate. But here, this is not blind. This is, what you would expect to have at a regular tasting. And so let's go ahead and start breaking these whiskeys down. What I like to do, if you have an aroma kit, then, this is a shameless plug, you can buy these aroma kits on my Bourbon Real Talk website. It's bourbonrealtalk.com/shop. If you just go to bourbonrealtalk.com, there's a shop button you can click on. But I like to smell it up and then look at the list of the flavors and think about what is it that I'm tasting. And it's like this: am I tasting chocolate? Am I tasting coffee, petrol, smoke, tobacco? On the nose, I am getting a little bit of tobacco on this one. Am I tasting anything earthy? Hay. Often hay is a component that you'll get in really young bourbons. So anything that's less than, well, it depends on where it's from, but like a Kentucky bourbon that's less than 4 years old, a lot of time you'll taste like a grassiness or a hay. We've already talked about leather. Some whiskeys have a strong tea component, which I actually got a little bit of tea on one of these. So what I'll do is I'm looking at the list, I'm smelling, I'm trying to find the scents that I'm picking up. And then I'll start to taste the whiskey, and I'll actually pick up the vials, open them up, and smell them. So there's a lot of fruit flavor in this whiskey, and just a hint of mustiness on the finish, and that's just because of that age. Sometimes whiskeys will start to get, a little bit musty. And so on this one, there's a good bit of fruit. What I think I might be getting is strawberry. And so I'll grab the strawberry vial and I'll smell it, and I still have that flavor on my palate because of the finish of the whiskey. And I can confirm that there is a strawberry component to this whiskey, which is kind of interesting because I don't get strawberry a lot. And truth be told, I've done this before with these whiskeys, and I get strawberry on all of them. I also get on this second one, which is the Remus Repeal Reserve III, there's a little bit of that strawberry flavor in there, but there's something that's a little bit extra in there. And I think it's more of a tropical fruit flavor, which is like pineapple, mango, guava. And that's another cheat. Like, keep in mind, none of these whiskeys taste exactly like pineapple, right? None of them taste exactly like anything. It's a combination of flavor compounds that you're experiencing. And it has to do with, how much of, this isoamyl acetate is in it, or whatever the compound is that you're tasting, and is it enough for it to stick out for you? And so you may be thinking pineapple, but somebody else might be thinking, guava or mango, or sometimes even peaches, or, whatever. And so there are no right or wrong answers, which is part of the reason why when you do this, especially in a public setting, you have to be very careful about how you discuss your tasting notes, because you don't want to alienate somebody that's newer that you don't really have a good relationship with yet by making them feel like they're wrong or they're stupid, right? And so there's always a way to discuss it. So on this one, which is the Volstead Act, it's the oldest. This one's a 14-year-old. And this one has actually started to go past what I would consider a good age for a whiskey. I'm starting to get a stronger musty note, what I would consider earthy. So I'm going to grab the vial of earth, smell it, confirmed. There's definitely an earthy component to this. Still getting that strawberry though. A little bit of petrol, which is kind of a chemically, gasoline-y. Yeah, a little bit of that. Not too much. But again, that fruit's still shining through. So this is still super, interesting whiskey. I would say, in a tasting, that people who prefer dusties and really higher age spirits are going to like the Volstead Act more, probably. And that people that like the, medium aged, more vanilla and butterscotch forward whiskeys are probably going to like the Remus Repeals a little better than the Volstead. But having those types of discussions in these tasting sittings honestly, it's part of the fun of being in a whiskey club or being involved in the whiskey community if you're not in a club. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about doing a recording on that it's really hard to explain to somebody who likes to drink brown water, as we sometimes call it, that's not really been engaged in the collector community, what benefit that brings them and what they're missing out by not being a part of it. And it's had a really large positive impact on my life doing these types of tastings and meeting people. And, it's caused me to develop a passion to help other people get as involved in the hobby as they want, up to the point that I actually created a product to help people learn how to break down whiskeys. And if you have not engaged in, meeting up with other people and getting to know other people that have these similar interests, I highly recommend that you do so. You can find the whiskey club that I'm a part of online by going on Facebook and searching for Someone Say Whiskey. And you can apply to be a member. There's a short questionnaire. So long as you have an actual Facebook profile that has had some activity and you have photos and all that stuff, you'll probably be approved. We don't do anything illegal in our clubs. We don't allow transactions or trading or anything like that. But we do coordinate events and things like that. And it makes it fun because you get together with other like-minded people and they'll bring bottles that you've never had the opportunity to try, and they'll let you try them for free. And you bring your bottles. And you may not be very experienced at collecting whiskey, and that's okay. The whiskey community is extremely accepting. And so being able to get together and do these tastings, you may not be able to bring really fancy bottles to the tasting, and that may make you feel like you shouldn't go. But most of the whiskey collectors that I know understand that we're collecting so that other people who didn't get the chance to get that same bottle have the opportunity to taste it. We don't begrudge you having the opportunity to try it. That's what we got it for. And so I want to encourage you out there, if you are interested in getting more involved in collecting and tasting whiskey, breaking things down, and being a part of a good community, I think you should search to see if you can find a local Facebook group or whiskey club that you can get involved in, because it does bring a lot of opportunities into your life that you may not have realized that you were missing out on. So anyway, this was a kind of short one-off for Bourbon Real Talk. If you're new to the channel, and I know a lot of you are, stay tuned. This next week, actually later this week, I'm headed to Kentucky, and I will be interviewing a fair number of industry experts, people that you probably know their names, and those episodes will be coming out shortly. So don't lose hope if this wasn't your thing. But again, just wanted to help you get as involved as you possibly could be. If you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can find us at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us at YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram /Bourbon Real Talk. And yes, that is new. When you first get a YouTube channel, you can't have your channel named your channel name. You have to qualify for that. Well, Bourbon Real Talk qualified, and we are now under our channel name is our actual name on the URL. So I'm pretty excited about that. You can also check us out on your podcast player. And if you would like to help grow the network, I would personally appreciate it. If you're not already subscribed, I would love it if you would subscribe. If you are a subscriber, it would be very helpful if you would write a review, because the systems will not show the podcast to people who are searching for information unless we, match up to certain criteria. And one of the criteria is getting likes, subscribes, and reviews. So if you could go out and write a review, that would be very helpful for the channel. And if you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. And I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.